Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is David Stein, the founder of The Money for the Rest of Us, a podcast, a premier investment education platform providing professional-grade portfolio tools and trainings. And he's also the author of Money for the Rest of Us, 10 Questions to Master Successful Investing, which was published by McGraw-Hill. We talk about how David grew his membership platform to over 1,000 members, the emotional impact of launching versus an evergreen model, and how to build a brand that goes beyond you as the individual to create a lasting legacy. Let's dive right into my conversation with David. David, welcome to the Plutus Awards Podcast. Really excited to have you on today.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's start off with talking about the paid membership site or portion of your show or your website. So I'm interested to find out, how far along in your podcasting journey was it when you decided to start this?
I launched what's now called Money for the Rest of Us Plus about 6 months after I started the podcast. So I started the podcast in 2014, and I figured I needed to make money somehow because I enjoyed doing podcasting. I launched a course on Udemy. It didn't do very well. I think I've made a grand total of $30 on Udemy. And at that point, I pivoted and launched the membership community December 2014. And it's grown incrementally, steadily. So it's about 1,200 paying members now. The one thing they get is they don't have to listen to ads on the podcast. So they get ad-free version of the podcast, along with a number of other additional free premium podcast episode and other tools to help guide them in their investing.
It's interesting that that's one of the perks is no ads. Do you find that members really like that as a kind of perk for being a member?
Some people like listening to ads. I don't personally. Yeah, a lot of people join just because they don't like listening to ads. And because the ads are distracting. They're host-read ads, so they're not pre-recorded ads. But still, because my show's only 25 minutes long, there's 2 ads. But there's only 2 ways to make money with a podcast. You have ads, or you have to charge your customers directly in some way, or there's just a charity project or some other way to do it. But, I use ads as well as the premium membership site.
Yeah, I suppose that's true for a lot of business models too, is somebody has to pay for your work. It just depends on who it is, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So I am curious. So you started with the course and then you decided, okay, I'm going to pivot to a membership site. So why do you feel like that course bombed? And then why membership and not just, let me figure out how this course stuff is going to work instead of just doing something different?
Well, with Udemy, I thought that there would be more organic search traffic because there wasn't a whole lot of investing courses. And there just wasn't. And so at the end of the day, I realized, okay, Udemy is not going to sell this course. I'm going to have to sell it myself. And one of the ways that I keep retention very high on my membership site is I do what's known as a monthly investment conditions and strategy report. So it's almost like an investment newsletter. It is written, but I also do an audio version. And so that keeps people there. And these are tools that I use in my own investing. And so I figured a community would work better for me because it's ongoing. There's time decay with investment help. What I'm doing in my portfolio 3 years ago is different today. And so you have that continuity. And so it works better for a membership community. And that's an important thing to consider because if a course is one and done and they learn it and they're done, then the course is a great tool. But if it's something they're going to need continued help because the environment's changing, then in that case, the membership community model works really well.
That makes a lot of sense because most people, I think, who consider membership sites are like, oh, we have to constantly update it. So that can be a downfall for some models. But in your case, it does sound like it makes sense because even if you create a course, you're probably going to have to update it continually anyways. So why not just charge a monthly fee? So I am curious about your pricing model because I know you have a monthly subscription where people just pay month by month, and then there's annual, and then there's a lifetime subscription. So tell me about how you got to those numbers where the lifetime member would be profitable for you.
The lifetime was something I just implemented at the beginning of 2021. When I launched the site back in 2014, there was only a monthly was the only thing available. I was charging, I think, $19.95 a month. And members wanted to pay annual. And I thought, okay, I don't ever pay annual, but if you want to, so I launched the annual. And then, in the investment newsletter space, Stanberry's of the world, a lifetime subscription is pretty common. I never wanted to do it because I could never define what lifetime meant. And I didn't necessarily want to commit to selling a lifetime product because that means I'm basically committed my business to continue to produce. But, it's been almost 7 years I've been doing podcasting, and I realized that, money for the rest of us is a brand. So if I change my mindset to where this could continue beyond me, and maybe by selling lifetime memberships, I'll be forced to think longer term. And members had requested it. And so it started as an experiment. And I found that almost 20% of my members chose lifetime. I keep raising rates. So right now it's like $450 a year, but I had members that were paying $169 a year. Most were paying about $200. And I just gave them a special 2 weeks, basically. If you want to upgrade to lifetime, it's $750. And then you don't have to make any other payments the rest of your life. With a membership community, because how do you price that? Like, what do you price lifetime? And so I kind of priced it based on my typical member will stay 2.5 years to 3 years. And so I basically priced the lifetime about that. So 3 to 4 years. So if somebody stays that long, then they stay basically what their expected lifetime value of the customer. But then you don't have to worry about credit cards expiring or anything like that. And many have been with me 5, 6 years, and it was sort of a way to give back to them and say, hey, you obviously like my content. I don't really need to be charging you every year. Let's do that. And it's worked.
Awesome. So it sounds like most of them who have opted for the lifetime have been loyal, I guess, customers for a little while?
Yeah, most. But there were a few that had just joined in the last year. In fact, some had joined, and I didn't even think about this. They joined for monthly and then upgraded to lifetime. So then they got a super good deal because they were only a member a month. But apparently there is an appetite for a lifetime membership. And, I kind of looked at what others, in the Plutus and FinCon community were charging for investment related courses and try to price it based on that. So if someone just wanted to buy a course, which is really a community, what would they charge? And, some are charging $1,200. And I feel like I'm adding that much value in terms of the type of investment help that I provide that, it's worth it.
Yeah. So I do want to get back to what you're saying about this being beyond you as a person. It is becoming a brand because of the lifetime subscription. We'll get back to that. But what I'm curious about is, I think you mentioned pre-recording that you have around 1,000 members. Obviously, it took a little while to get to that. So I'm curious, what were some of the things that you did to market or generate more word of mouth about this membership?
I've never advertised it. So people generally found me through the podcast. So there's about 1,200 members. For a while there, it was open all the time. And then I would do launches, and that worked pretty well. Typically I'd convert about 30% or so that were on the wait list for the launch. And then when my book came out last year, I decided, well, if people are going to be finding this book all the time, why don't I just try just leaving it open all the time? And I found I pretty much made the same amount in terms of the people that would join versus doing the launches. And the other thing that helps is raising your prices. And so late last year, I decided to increase the price 50%. And so I let everybody know, ran some ads that it's going to increase 50%. And I had about 160 people join just in December based on that, because people need a push sometimes to join. And so that helped. But for now, I'm pretty comfortable with my pricing and certainly keep it there for, it's hard to figure out pricing. Like what's it worth what you do? And we tend to think it's not worth as much as it's hard to raise prices. And so it's kind of a discipline to do that. In my case, it's fortunate there are investment related newsletters. I kind of know what their pricing is and can kind of benchmark off of that, as well as what I'm no longer registered investment advisors, but I know what financial advisors, investment advisors charge. And I can also kind of benchmark off of that also.
Yeah, that makes sense, is having sort of a frame of reference, and then you can go higher, lower, or the same, essentially, is what they're doing. I am curious about launches versus like an evergreen model that you're trying now. Do you feel like it's less work, just let anybody join anytime, or the launches were
It's about the same. What I didn't like about having it open all the time initially was I was just too emotionally involved. Like, did anybody join my site today? Oh, nobody's joined. I'd get an email every time somebody joined. Well, if nobody joined for 3 days, well, maybe my site doesn't work anymore. And so I kind of liked the launch of just not having to worry about nobody's joining because nobody's allowed to join. And, we did a series of emails and videos and, kind of the traditional launch formula. But maybe I just been doing it long enough. So I'm not like emotionally vested in whether anybody joined that day or not. I don't get the emails anymore. I typically just look at it maybe twice a month to see what the progress has been. And that sort of takes me out of that whole getting pinged every time somebody joins or quits my site, because I'm thinking more longer term, and I just don't like to be notified. So I'd look at it twice a month now.
Yes, that totally makes sense. I appreciate that. I think that's a really great difference between launches and evergreen models. I think that's a really great takeaway there. So going back to your brand and sort of separating yourself from your brand, so to speak, have you put any steps in place to say, okay, well, if I decide I'm going to retire from money for the rest of us, or I just want to pass it on, what have the steps that you want to take for that?
I work with my son. So my son's been working for me for about 3 years now. So that helps. There's somebody, if I get hit by a bus, he can at least wrap things up and refund a bunch of lifetime memberships or partial refunds. Beyond that, I was in a mastermind probably 2 or 3 years ago. It only lasted a few months, but it was with a number of FinCon podcasters, but also FinCon bloggers, two of which since sold their sites for, $6-7 million each. And I remember being on those calls and not understanding what they're talking about, because I had never really done any type of SEO. I just, I podcasted and I had a membership community. And, in this past year, we've really focused on that. We learned, okay, this is what SEO is. Maybe we could get more traffic from the website itself, because one, it's easier to sell a website than it is to sell a podcast if I'm the only host. And I've thought about it. I've had podcasting friends that have brought on other hosts, launched other shows. But at this point, it's just sort of like I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And I typically work about 30 hours a week. I am thinking more long-term. We're trying to build more of an asset, a brand from that standpoint. And the primary way is to bring more organic search traffic in. We're focusing more on video, YouTube this year, and launch a joint show with my son and just kind of see where it goes. But eventually, over the next 5 or 6 years, I'm going to have to think about it more closely. How can I bring somebody on to be more involved in the written work that we do, like the investment conditions report? Because one of the things we do is we bring in a lot of institutional research. So we pay over 6 figures a year to access to institutional research, and then we kind of repackage that in a way to help individual investors and kind of bring it down to their level. And so what we do is, it's not magic. It is something that could be taught. So if I wanted to bring somebody on it, show them, here's what we present on a monthly basis, here's how you produce the report and make the decisions, then, I could do that.
Right. So speaking a little bit of the back end of what you invest, what are some other things that you have to put into place to run this membership site, like to make sure it's going smoothly?
We were with a platform called Rainmaker up until last year. Now we're on WordPress. We use a MemberPress plugin. We were able to increase our speed probably 4 or 5 times in terms of site speed. I mean, it's easy to do it on somebody else's platform, but it's a real pain to ever move. We spent over $25,000 last year on developers just moving our website over, because, trying to get the forum moved over and get it all synced and just the billing, it was such a pain. And so if I was going to do it today, I'd start with WordPress, which is very, very strong, obviously, and use a membership plugin based in WordPress and build it on your own site, as opposed to using somebody else's platform to launch your community or your, course is probably a little easier. But even with a course, if you move platforms, you have to upload all those videos again to somebody else's platform. So just having it on your own site, we host the videos on Vimeo. We host the audio on Amazon Web Services. And so, using other platforms to host the content, but ultimately pull it into your own platform so people can access it.
Got it. So for the forums, is that, or like, do you moderate the conversations? Is there like a community manager, someone that makes sure that people are being nice to each other?
Well, fortunately, people are nice to each other. We're using a WordPress forum plugin, and I never wanted to do a forum. I mean, that was something else where members say, "Hey, it would be nice to have a forum." And it's not terrible. I mean, it's active. There's probably 3 or 4 posts a day, so it's not like it's this huge thing. Last year, members had asked for a Discord server, so to kind of host another thing to where the members wanted to talk to each other more, kind of more casual. So my son Brett, he moderates that. And then I just take care of the regular forum. I rarely, if any, go on the Discord forum because it's really just to allow members to kind of interact themselves. Where with the forum itself, it's searchable. The conversations are archived. I get an email, somebody posts, and so I can make sure that somebody's answering their question. But the Discord is kind of a free for all. But even then, people are nice to each other.
That's good to know because that's not always the case.
What helps is that they're paid to be a member. So, I mean, if it was free, then it would be kind of a mess. But as paid membership, people are generally respectful to each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a lot of people are going to ask this, I know, so I have to ask it, is how do you lead podcast listeners to your membership community or your other paid offerings?
I try to do a really good podcast. And that's all I've really done. Since I launched the podcast, my call to action has always been to get on my email list. And so that's helpful. But I recently, or at least in the last year, I've actually, because I do dynamic ad insertions, so I can actually, for the people that are members, they don't hear any of the ads, including I do a pitch at the end now for the actual membership community. And it's something I never really did. I just, occasionally I would mention it if I was doing a launch, but I'm probably more conscientious about talking about it. At least, like, a lot of topics come from Plus members. And so I'll mention at the beginning of the podcast, sort of integrate it into the story of the show. Because I don't do interviews on my podcast. It's a solo show. And so I'm just teaching for 20, 25 minutes. So I can bring in something. We were discussing this on the member forums at Money for the Rest of Us Plus, or this member had this question and we're going to talk about it here. And so that's kind of a soft sell. And then at the end, I do say, if you want additional help, you can join my email list, or here's Money for the Rest of Us Plus. This is what it does. This is how it can help you if you want additional investment help.
And so on your email list, is there a series of emails you send out? Like, how do you then sell on your email list?
We hired a copywriter last fall to write a nurture series, and then we implemented it late last year. I don't think it's working. Well, I know it's not working. Like, nobody's joining because they get this window to join for, a discounted rate. And I decided to, I even rewrote it after I got it because I was like, this is just too salesy. There was too many pitches for it. And so I saved the pitches to the end. I think with the type of work that I do, people need to listen to a lot of free content before they trust me enough. And so we're going to probably have to revamp it. We're going to look at it. We're going to look at the data. Maybe they're just, I don't know, but it just doesn't seem to work because they need to trust you. And that takes listening to a lot of free content. And then they finally just join. I suppose some people join right away, but they're certainly not joining because I pitched them in the email list after they've only been on the email list for a month.
Right. So it sounds like your focus for the last 6-ish years has been really create a really good show, make sure I build trust through that, and then get some members.
Yeah, basically. I mean, try and retain members. So, the thing with the membership community, you need to keep retention low. So we'll lose about 1.5% to 2% of members per month. To me, that seems incredibly high. I mean, that's 25% of your members each year. On the other hand, that's about what Netflix does. So if you can keep it under a 10% annual churn rate, that's pretty good for membership sites. So I'm sorry, 10% per month. So, if you can keep it at 2%, that's a sustainable model. And we've been able to grow it each year slowly. This is not something where it's going to go viral. It's just little by little, you raise the prices, you increase the revenue. And so it's a model that works, but it's a very, very long-term model. It
makes sense. I think for many people who will see your story and go, oh, wow, you have all these paying members, they don't realize maybe, okay, well, I've launched this in 2014. right? And it's taken me this long for it to grow or be sustainable. And there's a lot of trial and error, obviously, in terms of how you've done things. In terms of maybe lessons or mistakes that you've made, like what would you say would be the biggest challenge that you've experienced in terms of growing and sustaining this membership site?
The hardest part is just sticking with it. With the membership community, what scares people about it is, or even with a podcast, I have to come up with a new episode every week. And one of the things that I've been very conscientious since I quit my corporate job and went out on my own was to maintain a sustainable schedule. So I only work 30 hours a week. Now I take 8 weeks off where I don't do the podcast, I don't do the premium episode, I don't do anything, 8 weeks throughout the year. And that helps because then, as I think about, well, what do I have to do? I know I have a break in mid-February. I'm just off for the week, and that makes it easier. So just focusing on that. The other thing that's helped is, and I've noticed this in the financial media space, there's a temptation to do everything. Like, okay, there's a new social media channel. I got to go do TikTok now. I have to go do Instagram Reels. I just don't want to do that. I just want to produce really, really good content. So I've always edited my own podcast and I edit my own YouTube videos because I like it. And that's why, and I'm telling a story and I want to get really good at telling a story in a podcast or a video or the membership community. I'll outsource other stuff. I'll outsource the web development. I'll outsource a lot of the back office stuff, but the actual content is what sells. And so I don't want to outsource that, but I don't want to get burned out either. And so it's sort of maintaining the pace so you don't get burned out. Outsource, which makes sense. Stop doing things that, like I don't do a whole lot on social media because nobody has ever joined my membership site that I'm aware of because I tweeted. And certainly not because I've Instagrammed or did Pinterest. And I've tried them all. And it's like, this just doesn't work. Because one of the things that I have found is helpful is to do things where the bar is really high in terms of, well, not everybody's going to do a podcast because it does take a lot of work, or YouTube takes a lot of work. In fact, I've been doing YouTube off and on since 2012, and I stopped in 2019 right around my book launch because I realized I can't compete here. I don't have time to bring in B-roll and make a really compelling video. Well, fine. Now the software's caught up. So there's a software program called Ecamm Live where I can set up all my scenes ahead of time and then my editing is just deleting stuff as opposed to trying to add in all this other content. And so try to find a way where we are in the marketplace to where what you can do can be competitive. So you can be best in class. And I've tried to do that in all aspects of my business. And that's one reason from like an SEO standpoint, Google's changed to where they're really focusing on this thing called EAT. So it's authority, trustworthiness, and expertise. So now they're ranking sites on things that we can be competitive with because we've had this site for 6 years. And so we started writing really detailed investment guides. So now we can be competitive because now you just can't go hire a freelancer to write a detailed article on mortgage REITs because it's hard. And so I'd rather do less, but do things that are challenging and you can make them excellent as opposed to try to do everything just to try to keep up.
That's an amazing philosophy. I love that. Thank you, David. So where can everyone find you and your podcast, all those things?
Go to moneyfortherestofus.com, and that's where you'll find the podcast and our writings and the other things we do.
Well, again, David, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with David. Lesson number 1 is to look at successful business models as inspiration. So for David, his model is based very similar to investment newsletters that have been around for a while. He even looked at the pricing, how it was built and how it became successful. And he used that to build up his own business, Money for the Rest of Us. So for you, maybe you're a freelancer, maybe you're looking to create some courses for your online platform, or you want to be a social media influencer, whatever that may be, take a look at people who have been successful, ideally for a while, see what they do, and just try and see what sticks. Lesson number 2 is to constantly get feedback from members. So as you heard in my conversation with David, he had mentioned many times that many of his members wanted certain features and certain things added to the paying platform. The lesson here is if enough people ask, even if you're not sure if it's a good idea, even if you didn't really want to do it in the first place, just go with it and see what works. Lesson number 3 is to start thinking about how you may want to exit the business. Now, this sounds really strange if you're in the midst of building a business or you've gotten to a pretty good point to think about exiting. What I'm getting at here is to think about the legacy that you want to build. So is this business a solo venture? Are you just a freelancer? When you retire, you're done? Or have you built up a brand, or you want to build a brand that will go beyond you? So for David, he'd brought on his son as someone who's working on his brand, and he's now currently thinking about how he wants to maybe pass on some tasks or things that will extend beyond him as a person, right? It becomes a business, a platform. So that's something to consider, whatever your business looks like right now. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards Podcast. If you're interested in collaborating with other financial bloggers, podcasters, influencers, and more to chat about your work, interests, ask and answer questions, come join our Facebook community. Search for Plutus Community in the search bar or head to facebook.com/groups/Plutus Community. We hope to see you there and get a chance to support you and your amazing work.